At this point, I'd like to call Bill to the floor, and I'm going to hand over to Bill and Carl at this stage to essentially run you through a series of presentations and activities this afternoon. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Russell. Now, have we got anything happening up behind us? Oh, we have. Good. The one message I've I suppose I came here with, because I learned it from Jack Makem, my old teacher, years ago. He had one basic set of beliefs, and that was, it ain't what you do but how you do it. And that sums up the activity mix story, really. It ain't what you do but how you do it. Pretty much anyone can make any system work if they've got the right set of management skills and the right balance sheet and the right resources. So, there's no glib answers. It ain't what you do but how you do it. Now, normally, blokes like me and Jason and Carl, we get to come and talk to people, talk to farmers, and we get the first say usually. And we can stand up here and say clever things, and then it's up to the farmers to follow us up. So this time we're all on the back foot, really, because from what I saw this morning, nearly all the clever things that needed to be said have been said. I thought there was some fantastic stuff, and luckily all the really good stuff I heard this morning, I think some of it's in the paper that I've prepared. There's a set of handouts there, and there's a written paper for you. So there's a good overlap, and as I say, we're trying to explain the same phenomenon. We're trying to understand the same real world. So it's nice when the real world and academic worlds actually intersect. It's not always the case. But, being on the back foot, talking to a group of farmers is nothing new, really. I noticed the economic rationalists got a bit of a belting this morning for some reason. I don't know what the alternative is, by the way. What, economic stupidity? But when they deregulated the dairy industry, I spent a fair bit of time trying to convince dairy farmers why deregulation was a good thing. And it wasn't too bad in Victoria, really, because Victoria exported most of its dairy products, so they were already facing the world price. But I gave a talk one night in some grim mechanics institute down in South Gippsland, wet, cold, miserable place it was. And, of course, the talk went down like a lead balloon. But anyway, they had a nice fire going out the back outside, and we went out there after the talk and stood there having a can. And I was on one side of the fire having a tin on my own, and the farmers were on the other. And anyway, the chairman bustled out and he said to the farmers, "Which of you blokes called that economist a bastard?" And quick as a flash, one of them said, "Who called that bastard an economist?" So, it's not easy following farmers. But I actually read something at the weekend which really made me think, because I'm always concerned about talking to farmers. Like, you're not in the business of teaching grandmother to suck eggs, right? The best farmers I know are so bloody smart and so switched on. Just putting that whole complicated mess together the way they do just blows my mind. And so you feel very humble, and you're really sensitive to the idea of, talking bloody platitudes to really smart people. But I read something at the weekend and it was talking about something much more interesting than economic rationalism. It was talking about writers. And it said, good writers make the readers realise things they knew but didn't know they knew. Just think about that for a minute. It makes people recognise what they know, but they didn't actually know they knew it. And I thought, Jesus, that's good. I thought, now that's what we're going to try and do. That's what should be my role, is when I talk about farm economics, to people who know all about it and who are doing it, maybe in some of the things we write and say, it might just trigger something that you already bloody know it, but you've never actually thought about it in these terms, you never recognised you knew it in those terms, things like that. So that's the point of the talk today. Because as we know, there's 1,000 reasons why any farm system is run the way it is, why any farmer does what they do. We know there's 1,000 reasons why they do what they do when they do it. But that's not good enough, because those 1,000 reasons only apply now. And tomorrow, in a changing world, there's another 1,000 potential reasons why you should potentially change what you do. So don't fall back on that old one, the farmers, there's 1,000 reasons why they do what they do and therefore they get it right. That's fine. You can get it right now, but you've got to keep getting it right. And in a changing world, it means you changing your system is inevitable. And there was a lot of that come through today with everybody, all the farmers. I thought that was really quite clear, the need to change, the imperative to change, and then how to think about that change. And after, Carl will follow me and we'll go through a little exercise about thinking about a change and just some of the steps we go through. But I noticed Jason talking about productivity. Productivity come up this morning. The rate of productivity increase certainly dropping off all around the world in the developed countries. In direct proportion to the investment in productivity, in R&D productivity research that's going on. So if the investment drops off, the productivity drops off, simple as that. Luckily, China and India are keeping it up a bit, but the developed countries are really dropping off. But it reminded me of, just going back, 1984, Victorian government had a Director General of Agriculture. He was an ex-agronomist. He was a good scholar, and he had somehow fell into this job, Director General of Agriculture. And of course, when you get a new job, you go around and make a big man of yourself and try and convince everybody what a good job you're going to do. And he went around the country telling everybody that in the next decade, productivity in Victoria and agriculture is going to increase 25%. And at one of these talks, a farmer jumped up and said, well, that's about as profound as saying the next Pope's going to be a Catholic. Because that was the way it was then. From about the 1950s onwards, we had productivity gains ticking over per year in broadacre, not sheep by the way, but broadacre, at 2.5% a year. And it was a given. And it's only in recent years we've had to sit back and say, Christ, it's not actually set in stone, it's always going to be like that unless we really make an effort and do the investment. And just on that question from Condobolin, where does the productivity gains go? Jason answered it. It's shared between producers and consumers and processors. We did that actual analysis for lamb in Victoria, and these numbers come out quite similarly for lots of industries. I've done it for dairy. It's never been done for grain, but for a given investment in for a 1% reduction in farm production costs in lamb, those benefits were worth, I can't remember, maybe 20 million a year or something. No, 42 million a year it was. But of those benefits, about 70% I think go to consumers, and about, less than 10% to processors, and about 20% to the farmers. So that's how, to answer that Condobolin question, that's how it's shared. And that sort of ratio, sometimes 60-40, but generally the bulk of it goes to consumers, which partly explains why taxpayers put in 50% of the investment in ag R&D. Totally justified, they benefit. Everyone benefits from ag R&D. But it also makes a good case why farmers could well and truly, when they have their levy vote, they could actually vote to invest more in ag R&D than they do, which they don't usually. They're usually a bit tight on it. Again, for good reasons, because the benefits are sometimes 30 years down the track. It's your kids who are going to benefit, not you. So I can sort of understand that. But there's a good case for everybody increasing their investment in ag R&D to try and head off that slowing of the rate of productivity gain. That's the point I wanted to make. And it's shared between producers and consumers is the other point. It's actually the best investment producers can make because the public puts in half it actually doubles the return on the producer's investment. Simple, best investment you can make, but as I say, it might be for your kids or that little bloke we had, Vicky and Tony's little boy. He'll benefit. So keep him in mind when you're voting on the levy. Now, I'm not actually meant to be talking about any of that. The answer to that question, what's a few more sheep, a bit less crop? The answer to that question, you want to know the answer? It depends. It sounds glib, but it's actually true. The answer to any question in farm management or any question in economics for that matter is it depends. And as we saw from all those cases we saw this morning, it depends on all sorts of things central and unique to those cases. Now, let's move on. I've only got a few minutes here. We've got other stuff to do. I want to just show you how an economist thinks. You, as farmers, have often just learnt to do it intuitively. A bit more of this, a bit less of that. Am I better off on the whole? That's as simple as that. Like, there's only about 2 or 3 economic ideas in economics, and that's one of them. Okay? Should I do a bit more of this, a bit less of that? Is the whole bigger? Simple as that. And you do it intuitively. You didn't need, people were doing this 4,000 years ago when agriculture started. They sort of worked that out. So we focus on the margin, not the average. None of this average nonsense. You don't make a decision about a change based on the average of anything, because an average doesn't exist in fact. An average is simply, an artificial construct. You can never find an average anything. It's just a number that's made up. A marginal number is real. I put in a bit of extra N on, I get an extra 10 kilograms of dry matter. That's real. Marginal numbers are real. Averages are a nonsense. They're made up nonsense. The only people who love them are consultants who love benchmarking and average this and average that. Not a meaningful number. Economists focus at the margin. And as I say there, I said I'm on the back foot talking to farmers, but I can say one thing. None of you get enough economic theory in your life. None of you have enough economic theory in your life. So I'm going to give you a little bit. And then you might say, why theory? Well, we heard a lot today about people collecting data, collecting the facts of the matter. Some empiricism, that's a very good thing. But facts without theory is fantasy, right? It's got you need the theory needs to put the facts together into a coherent story. Theory without facts is fantasy. Sorry, facts without theory is rampant empiricism. So I was thinking of Rupert collecting your yield data. It's a great thing to do. You then need some sort of theoretical construct in your head to make sense of it and make a decision. How will I use that? So that's what I'm talking when I mean theory, right? Put theory and facts together and you're going 100 mile an hour. And it's really about seeing the woods for the trees. What an economist does with their model, or whatever you want to call it, take out everything in the decision that doesn't matter. Just keep the things in the decision that are going to change. And Carl will talk about partial budgets a bit later. Only the things that change are the things you want to count. And then not all the things in the decision matter equally. Yield and price, they're the big ones. Oh, and on that question about risk, you're right, what you've said about price risk, but in wheat growing across Australia, yield risk always trumps price risk. So, you've got the double whammy. I know you've got both, but generally the yield risk is the bigger one than the price risk, although you've got to manage both. There's woods for trees. The whole farm approach, the central premise of economics, really, is you can't explain a phenomenon, the whole phenomenon, by really knowing a lot about part of it. Right? Solutions to problems are not solutions to holes. So it's no good solving the soil fertility problem if the real problem is you've got too much debt. Okay, so then talking about holes, that's looking at those little snapshots today, we didn't see the whole of those farms at all. We saw parts of them and some really interesting parts. But looking closely, I noticed I never saw one working dog or one bad fence. Now, but I'll bet there are both those things on those farms. So what we saw was a very good snapshot of the best parts of the farms. They always, did you notice? Have another look when you see it. Everyone's lined up against the best fence on the farm or the best shed on the farm, as you'd expect. But you've got to look at the whole of the business. And we never went near balance sheets and stuff today. That's fair enough because it's all private. And I noticed in our table discussions and a lot of the discussion, we're very focused on the technical. That's fine, you've got to get that stuff right. The technical alone won't answer any questions, won't solve any problems. You've got to be really good at that, but you've still got to get the balance sheet right, otherwise it doesn't matter what you do. So when I talk about the whole, I mean the balance sheet, the agronomy, the animal husbandry, the genetics, everything, every bit of it. And then you can answer some questions. And my science colleagues are trained to know more and more about less and less, to answer questions about part of the system at great depth, which is great because we need that sort of knowledge. But that alone won't answer a question about the whole farm. And it's harder to know more and more about more and more. That's why people prefer to work in their discipline than interdisciplinary, right? You don't have a choice because the world doesn't come to us in disciplines. It actually comes to us as a mess. and you've got to try and make sense of it. So the farm management approach is better to solve the whole of the problem roughly than part of the problem extremely well. Better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. Okay? And that comes through in David's talk this morning as well. And then the key, obviously, is just get the question right. And that ain't easy. Once you've got the question, the rest follows. The solutions are usually obvious and they're usually few. The real skill is identifying the problem. We better move on. Oh, I was glad I had that. Because Vicky said it, Murray said it, Bruce said it. Vicky said, to make a success of things, you've got to be passionate about it, you've got to be the best at it, and she had another line about something to do with profit. Bruce said, it's really hard to make a top job of cropping and livestock. Murray said, it's really hard to make a top job of something you don't like much, right? Those three criteria for success, nothing to do with farming, never come out of farming. Come out of research into the top 100 companies in the US stock market. They followed their performance over 15 years. They did case studies, detailed case studies of those that had grown their wealth over 15 years. And the three things that come out of the three characteristics of these big firms that were successful over a long period of time is that the management was passionate, they loved what they were doing, they wanted to be the best in the world at what they were doing, and they knew exactly, precisely, with great knowledge, they knew what made money in their business. And when I saw that, I thought, bloody hell, they're describing every top farmer I know. So if you want to know the three things that make, and you know this because you're here, this is what you are. You're passionate about your business, you want to be the best at it, and you know exactly what makes money and what doesn't. Farm businesses are unique. Again, that's why we can't generalise. We've got 6 case studies today, all of them unique. We can learn lessons from them, but we can't take those lessons and apply them to our own place without closely looking at our own place. So it's a folly to think you can really work out how to run your business by looking hard at someone else's. You've also got to look hard at your own and face the brutal facts. You know, everyone deludes themselves, but if you want to make a success of it, you've really got to be brutal about, these are my constraints, these are my limits, these are my opportunities, this is my potential. And my neighbours have got some good ideas. I wonder how they would work. But ultimately, every business is unique, every person's unique, with different attitudes to risk, different stages of life, different numbers of kids, different goals, the whole bit. And there's also people, farmers out there who already know how to farm better than they do. Because there's other goals. It's not just about profit, is it? It's about, and we heard some lovely stories today about the family and work-life balance and the kids and all that stuff. That's what it's about. Okay. And again, when we talk about assessing performance, wealth, efficiency is profit, liquidity is cash. You can't look at any one of those things. You've got to look at the three of them. I think Murray might have talked about his real estate business. You've got a real estate business, you've got a farming business. The real estate business in New South Wales, ag land, I saw a paper over about the last 10 years, has averaged 6% per annum. That's okay. Add another 4 or 5 to that and you're doing better than the share market. So don't tell me good farming on good land is not a good investment. But you need to look at the three, you can't look at the one. You need to look at the wealth effects, the profit effects and the cash effects. Any one of those, again, won't tell you the full story. David mentioned this nicely several times. It's all about looking at the future, alternative futures. Like the future's going to come, whether we like it or not, it's going to turn up, and we've got to deal with it. The proper comparison is not now with the future. The proper comparison is future number 1 versus future number 2. And so change is inevitable because the world's changing around us. Too often we see people saying, oh, I might do this, and they're comparing the this with now, what they're doing. But that's not right, because what they're doing now is not an option for the future, because the future, everything's different. So the right comparison is, I might do this, and end up in this position in the future, or I might do that and end up in that position in the future. So the one message from today is you're comparing 2 or 3 alternative futures. You're never comparing the future with the current, because the current's not an option for the future. The status quo is not an option. Obvious. And David talked about having a 5-year plan. David talked about options. It's all about options. Economics is the discipline about options, about weighing up options. We use the word choices, but it's options. There's a saying, talking about looking forward. We don't know. Rupert talked about, or don't know what's coming next. One year we had the locusts, and I got over that, and then bloody hell the mice came, and no one told me they were coming. There's a saying, it's a wise person. People think it's a wise person who knows what is coming, and that's wrong again. It's a wise person who knows that you cannot know what is coming, okay, because the future's unknowable. Yeah, there you go. No one's ever experienced anything like that, I'm sure. I think that sort of stuff happens in New Zealand, I think. Be an interesting challenge getting it out, by the way. It's called uncertainty. So far I've talked about why you need theory, I've talked about why you need the whole farm approach, I've talked about why you need to look at wealth, profit and cash, and now I want to talk about the future, and the future being unknowable and uncertainty. And the point I want to make, there's a nice little thing. Mike Carroll from the NAB did this a couple of years ago. That's compound annual growth rate, right? Rate of return. This is the risk, standard deviation, which Jason talked about. 16%. Where's the share? All ordinaries, all industrials. There's your share market. 10%. Oh, this was over about 20 years, right? Historic, the future will change, but it tells us something. Now, where's farming sitting there? Here's your average farm there. About 6% from farming, from owning and farming, that is, and 16% variation around that year on year over the 20 years, looking backwards, right? But no one in this room is there, because that's the average farm. There's the best of them. The top 25% are up there. That's what happened over about the last 20 years. About 12%, 11%, same volatility as the share market. As good an investment as you'll find in the economy. But there's a message here too. What if, we had to take a lot more risk in order to earn a lot higher return, don't we? That's the story. So the message is this. It's actually risk that creates the return. And if you don't believe me, let's sell it all. Let's put the money in cash, term deposit. You get there. You would have got 6%, 4% risk. A safe, secure future is available to anybody. There's just no money in it. Okay? So you can have it, sell the farm, put in a term deposit. You've got rid of your risk. You've also got rid of most of your returns. So it's risk that creates return is the point. Yeah, and this is how the world is not. Read that. They're talking about futures options here for those interested in selling wheat. But this is the go. High profit, low risk. Who's into that? Hey, let's have a slice of that. It's bullshit. Never happened. The world does not work like that, because I just showed you it's risk creates return. You can get high profits and high risk. You can have low profit and low risk. You cannot have high profit and low risk. It just doesn't exist. That's nonsense. They're thieves. Yeah, if you run the course, you've got it. You're onto it. I want to talk a little bit about how we're going for time. 1 minute. Righto, we're about 10% into this talk, so I'll steal another 5 minutes. I've got to catch a plane anyway, so don't worry. Now, none of you probably used this language or looked at the question this way, but I just want to run through it quickly, what economics says about this activity mix thing. And clearly, supplementary, complementary, competitive, they're the words we use. What do they mean? There's activity number one on the vertical axis, activity number two on the horizontal. If it's supplementary, you can have more of it without affecting your other activity. It's the rough country you run the weathers on, they've got no other use. It's not going to affect your cropping activity. That's supplementary. Then there's this one. There's a lot of this going on. Complementary. Oh, I'll run more livestock and actually I can grow more crop. It's the role of the lucerne. It's the intermediate addition out of one activity into another, which, again, I think Murray talked about the problem with the beef. He can't figure out how much it contributes to his whole activity, but he knows it does. And that's why we look at the whole, we don't look at the part. So we know that if we've got a certain amount of this mix, this activity and that activity, we know the whole will be this big. We don't necessarily need to know the way they're contributing to each other. We just need to know if we mix them together, we can get to this. And so we do. Theory says you should be up to maximise the complementarities, and you do it. Where the economics now comes in, no economics up to there, that's a no-brainer. You just do it, no economics involved. Economics comes in here where I can have a bit more of this or a bit less of that. That's the competitive stage. If I have more crop, I'll have to give up a certain amount of livestock. And the interesting question is, how much? How much more crop can I have, or how much livestock do I have to give up to have an extra hectare of crop? And there's some simple arithmetic to help solve that. But we'll move through this. Yeah, so that's that. It's not only about profit. I've talked about risk and return. I've talked about correlated. Jason made the point, if the two activities are less than 100% perfectly correlated, then some diversification can reduce your volatility of the whole. It's just a simple bit of arithmetic. A bloke got a Nobel Prize for this insight. But you can put two activities together. If they're not perfectly correlated, you can increase the return without increasing the risk. Okay, and that's why we're interested in how the prices of activities go up and down together and things like that. There's a subtle point there, though, about this diversification. One of the best things you can do to manage risk is to be really good at what you do, which is specialise. And again, I think David mentioned this. So, and I noticed within several of the case studies, there was classic cases of specialising in what you do best, but at the same time diversifying, but getting some other specialist to do it, getting a specialist cropper in to do the cropping. Brilliant concept. And the next level of that is, for Christ's sake, get some of your investment out of agriculture. Get that portfolio principle working for you. That's the only advice you can ever give. Have a spread of activity, spread of investments, so you're not totally exposed to agriculture or to any particular part of it. But again, on your attitude to risk, if you it comes at a cost. The more you diversify the income, you'll have a lower income but a more stable income, unless they're 100% correlated. Okay, so that's the point of diversification. So when you make the decision, there's all these agronomic rules. You can't break them, but you can bend them a bit sometimes. If the price is right, put the crop back in and deal with the weed problem, you know. But those rules have to be met. Yeah, you can look at, so just look at how's the whole farm mix look with different combinations of sheep and cattle, so crop and livestock, say. You can just do some arithmetic on that, but you need to think about the balance sheet and the implications. Does it involve investment in capital for sheep or cattle? Don't forget that balance sheet. It's going to change your gearing ratio and your need for cash. There's a thing about what numbers that come up today a few times. What numbers do I use? I say don't use the average. What we do, there's a little trick we do. Is this. Write down the 5 types of numbers: the worst, poor, most likely, good and best. How often out of 20 years that happen? That gives you a probability. Multiply the probability by the event, gives you the expected value, sum them up, that's the total. So that's the number to use for this expected mix of whatever the mix is. right? That's the number to use. A probability weighted number is better than just a straight average or a most likely. It makes you think about the bad years, how often they happen, the good ones. And as Vicky said, think about the upside of risk. You've got to be aggressive about risk as well as defensive about it. It's got an upside as well as a downside. David said, the 3 years in 10, when you're going to make your money, make sure you are equipped to do it, set up to do it. And in planning, think about the years in 10 that different things are going to happen. Once you've got that number, it's a useful number. You can look at the whole farm plan like this. There's different combinations of livestock and crop, and just see how the numbers stack up. And, you'll see there's a combination that'll be the highest total gross margin. When you're thinking about that, though, you've got to recognise as you add more and more crop into the system, you're going to have to give up more and more livestock to bring in more and more, get an equivalent amount of crop. The rate of substitution is not constant, it'll change. At the first, you can bring some sheep in without any less crop. When you're nearly fully cropped, to bring some more sheep in, you might have to give up quite a bit of crop. Okay, so the rate of substitution changes. Think about that when you think about those combinations and figure out which is the biggest, gives you the biggest number. You can do it as a 1 minute to go, a partial, and I'll leave this to Carl, how to think about the extra benefits, extra costs of more of one and less of the other. Here's a little example. This is worth dwelling on a little bit. Crop. This is what Tom Jackson, my PhD student, did for me. It's a real farm in Western Victoria. It could be 1,200 hectare beef, 700 of beef and 500 of crop, or 1,200 of crop. There's a little tool you can use in the spreadsheet now. The spreadsheet's the best invention since the wheel, by the way. There's a little risk thing you can put in there. You can do some analysis, and that gives you, see that red one there? Tom did a run of 10,000 times of 10 years. Now, you've only got 1 year at a time, I know, and you only got one run of 10 years in the next 10 years. But that gives you the probability of different levels of, what have we got, annual operating profit. The average is right up the middle there, right? But it could be over there at zero, could be over this side. The width, and that picture tells us something about the width of the distribution and the size of it, right? The likely profit, how much it's going to be just spread around that deviation that Jason talked about. That was all beef, pretty low, 300,000 average. There's all crop, around 1 million, but a hell of a range up to nearly 2 million, way back to lose 500,000. Hell of a range. There's a combination in between of crop and livestock. Looking at that is really useful to help you make your decision. If you're totally frightened of risk, you want the minimum risk, there's your minimum risk, that one. See, it's not very wide. It's also minimum income. It might suit some people at a certain stage. If you're going for it, you want to make maximum money and you don't care about risk, you'll go for the cropping, won't you? Your chance of picking up 2 million one year, chance of losing 500,000 another year. But the average is going to be around 1 million. You'll go for that. So looking at presenting the information that way can help you make a decision, weigh it up. They're just different combinations of crop and livestock. The more you had more crop you had in it, the more it looked like the total crop one, the more cattle you had in, as you'd expect. There's one concept I want to finish on, and this will take a minute. This is a concept I've never presented to farmers before. Jack Makeham and I had it in our farm management textbook 30 years ago, and I've always thought it was too esoteric. Now that we can present information like this, I actually think we can think about using this concept. It's called certainty equivalent. It's a sum that you would regard equal to a risky bet. It's the sum that I would have to pay you not to take part in a risky bet. Say your risky bet is going to be running beef cattle. So it's got that range of outcomes, it's got that average. How much would I have to pay you not to take that bet? An average of 300,000 could be 700, 600,000, could be minus 200,000. What sum do you think would be equal to that opportunity? And we can do that same question for the other two options. And what happens is this. It's called certainty equivalent. So let's take the red one. If you're a risk taker, someone was prepared to, the average might have been about around 350,000. A risk taker said, oh, you'd have to pay me bloody 350,000 not to play that game. So that opportunity to run all beef is equal to 350,000 to me. Oh, but I'm a risk averse. I hate the risk. Jesus, a bit over 200 grand, I'll take the 200 grand. We're trying to get a certain number that you regard as being equal to the risky bet. Does that make any sense? Because I find it hard to explain. It took me years to understand it. But just think about it. But it's a way you can use, and I'll finish now, it's a way you can use to compare two different options that have different amounts of risk and return. So you don't just look at the average profit. That's the point I'm trying to make. Look at the range of possible outcomes. And so when Tom did this analysis, he found that if you're a punter and don't mind a bit of risk, if you go back to what wheat was, the crop option was, you can see the crop option is going to give you an average of nearly $1 million, but a big range. Everyone with me? From 2 million down to minus $500,000. The person who was prepared to wear a bit of risk, you had to pay them over 800,000 not to play the game. They regarded 800,000 as being equal to playing, taking that risk. If you're risk averse, they would have said, give me 200,000. I'd regard a certain 200,000 as equal to that highly risky game because I don't like it. This is the end of the story. The theory then says, when you look at your two options, the one that you feel has the highest certainty equivalent, you've rated that one higher than the one with a lower certainty equivalent. So the risk taker, they're going to grow all crop. If they're fairly happy with risk, they'd grow all crop. If they're a bit averse to risk, around the middle, then it dominates. So certainly they're the two best options. The beef doesn't even get a Guernsey. It's getting a hammering today, isn't it? But I know good farmers can make good money from running good beef, so I know that as well. But in this case, they're the range of choices. So if you're highly risky, you'd have a lot of crop. Most people end up around here having a mix. And it's just, again, the theory explains pretty much what people do. We'll finish there. Carl's going to go on to a partial budget explanation, and then we're going to get you doing something, but all yours.